Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
So I have a question for you to the audience. How can you make sure your podcast actually brings in clients and builds real business relationships instead of just being more content? Well, that's exactly what Megan will dive into today. She'll share how small and medium business owners can design podcasts that don't just entertain, but create trust, spark collaborations, and open doors to new opportunities. If you've ever wondered how to transform your show into a relationship and revenue engine, this episode is for you, and you don't want to miss out. So, our guest today is Megan Dougherty from One Stone Creative. Megan is a digital marketing strategist and co founder of One Stone Creative, a podcast production agency that specializes in white label podcasting and network development. Since 2017, she has helped hundreds of business owners across a wide range of industries using podcasts as a powerful tool for content marketing and business growth. Megan created the Business Podcast Blueprints, the State of Business Podcasting Report, and the Podcasting for Business Conference, and is the author of Podcasting for Business, How to Create a Show that Makes Bottom Line Difference for Your Company. She lives in Western Quebec with her spouse, their cat, Nog, and a flock of chickens in an impressive collection of thriving houseplants. I like thriving houseplants. Hey, Megan, welcome back again. It's good to see you. Good to hear your
Thank you.
voice. And you have a favorite quote or saying?
Well, I think, I'm, as regular listeners will know, I'm a returning guest, so I've got the same one, as I did on our previous conversation because I just can't beat it in terms of quotes, but I just love from the poem, the author's name who has just immediately slipped out of my mind, which is terribly embarrassing. But "A promise made is a debt unpaid," and I love that it's from The Cremation of Sam McGee, the poem, and what I like about it is, it's one of my most important foundations as a business owner is if you say you're gonna do something, you gotta do it, and I think that's true in areas of business, it's true with podcasting, and I think it's a good rule for life and in a really interesting poem.
I think
No,
it's Robert Service.
Yes, that's exactly who it is, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, thank you.
yeah, actually reminds me. I saw a social media clip today, uh, earlier on, obviously, and someone says, "If you want to start something, just start it."
Yeah.
And the second piece was, you start something, figure out how far away you're going to go from home that you're comfortable with. So whether it's worth that energy. And that's actually from another podcast guest. Just happened to be on social media. Megan, when you first sit down with a business owner, what's the first thing you want them to understand about podcasting and the goals related to that?
Well, sitting down with someone who, let's say who's never podcasted before, the first thing I really want to understand about them is what do they think is going to happen when they start podcasting? And then I wanna compare that expectation or that hope for what the medium or the platform can do to what it can actually do. And then we also wanna look at, is what it can do and is what they want to happen what the business needs more than anything else over the next little while? Because, small, medium business owners, we don't have a lot of time and money to waste on projects that go nowhere. We have to be really judicious about how we're spending our resources. So the first thing I want to understand about a business is, can a podcast do what you need? And do you have an expectation of, is what you're hoping to get out of it going to be realistic in terms of the results you could expect from doing a show?
Megan, something that I'm very excited about. I've been on this journey now for about 5 years and watching people talk about podcasts. And the original thought was, I am a subject matter expert and I want to extend my brand. How do you find those connections work? And what roadblocks are there in brand extensions in your mind, if that even makes any sense?
I think I get what you're saying. And if I'm understanding correctly, it's you've been hearing a lot of people talking about how podcasting is going to help them with their brand authority and become more well known and become an expert. And I think it's really interesting you bring that up because a really big mistake that a lot of businesses make when they get into podcasting is that you can have a thought leadership show and get your own IP out there by spending all of your time interviewing other people and talking about what they're an expert in and letting them share their expertise. That can be a very valuable podcast, but it's not doing a whole lot to get your own company IP and priorities out into the world. So when someone does have the goal of getting their IP out there, establishing their brand authority, I'd recommend either having really long intro and outro contents, bordering the conversation so they have time to share their reflections and their ideas, or interspersing solo episodes, and also trying to make the conversations that they're having more conversational than interview, so that it really is two experts sharing knowledge rather than one host shining a spotlight on an expert.
When you're having whether they're interviewing somebody or they're interviewing a colleague or they have their own content, they're trying to address the FAQs. How do you help them structure the uh, the conversation? Because it's one thing to say, Turn page now. You can sound like one of the driving applications like Waze or whatever's out there. 200 meters, turn right. As opposed to you want to slow down now, you want to have a conversation and build a story into that. How do you help them frame that?
Well, a lot of it is some of it is just going to be experience. There are some highly irritating people who are really good at it, that kind of thing out of the gate. We hate them. But most of us have to practice and learn to plan and steer conversations so that they sound natural, but they're still hitting the most important points that you want to cover. And the best way to do that is to figure out what are the most important ideas you want to explore before starting the conversation. So that might mean figuring out, okay, as long as we talk about three main important things like the customer, the problem, and the solution, then we're going to have a good, rich conversation. Making sure to be mindful of the time and even a little practice over time, over episodes, steering people back and getting them back on track to the kind of conversation or the kind of points you need to have. Most people are very, very kind and very flexible. If you let them know at the beginning, hey, these are the most important things, like we can conversationally roam around as much as we want as long as we hit these important points. Most people are very open to that kind of thing because they want to serve your audience as well, too.
So we've all heard about trust and like. I'm assuming that even though it's a one way,
Mhm.
that podcasts help build trust. I'd like you to unpack that for me if you could.
Absolutely. Podcasts are really, really good at doing that. So maybe you've had the experience as a host, or maybe people listening, if they have podcasts. If you meet someone for the first time, you've never seen them before, don't know them from Adam, and they're a listener to your podcast, they're going to talk to you like they know you, and they're going to bring up little things. They'll be like, "Oh, so how's your cat doing?" And you're going to be like, "What?" And they're like, "Oh, you mentioned your cat 2 episodes ago. They hurt their paw. Are they doing okay?" They know. Audio is quite an intimate medium, especially because even though it is broadcast, it's one-to-many communication. It's at the request of the listener, and it's often integrated into a listener's life in a really meaningful way. So maybe there's a podcast I like, it comes out every Tuesdays, and okay, that's what I'm gonna listen to while I cook dinner on Tuesdays. And so every week I've got a date with this podcast host, and I get the in-jokes. I've been listening for a long time. I understand their verbal quirks. I feel like an insider and I feel like I know them. They're a part of my life. They're part of my schedule. And that really creates, everyone's talking about the last couple of years, parasocial relationships. Listeners do feel like they are developing relationships with hosts. And they are real relationships, even if they're not the same as the kind you might have with your neighbors or your friends.
When you're working with a client, they're, whether they're doing like what we're doing now, it's an interview, and we're bringing out the highlights. But there's certain kernels of information. So let's say, from an example of from the Knack Business podcast, either Motivate You, which is Women's Business or Creative Insight, or even the Canada Growth Network,
Mhm.
which is another leg of the journey that we're on. Do you target certain elements to be inserted at a certain point in time? Person you're interviewing is talking about their subject matter expertise, and then you engage. Is that how you kind of? Because I'm referring back to what you said earlier. Make sure you get your nodules in there so that you have that identification. Do you help structure that in, or do you just put it in as a quick advert that runs for like 15 seconds?
That's a good question. Okay. First of all, every host is the boss of their podcast. They can do whatever they want with their show. So,
I'm
yes,
not going to
you
sing.
can.
I'm not going to sing. Trust me.
Yeah,
No.
but you could if you wanted to. That's the point. So,
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring it back around then to the specific goals for the show as a whole, and maybe for individual episodes or different types of episodes that you have. If one of the goals is to say you've got the Canada Growth Network, this is new, it's going to be growing, you want to get people into it. Excellent. So, what are some things that would make people interested? Now, a 15-second advert, maybe that'll get the brand name out there. That'll get people hearing the name and becoming familiar. Most people don't really like ads that much, so it might be not creating the most favorable impression. But if instead, during a conversation you were having, say with me, you could say, a member of the Canada Growth Network in our forum where we were having this discussion mentioned, and then you share the anecdote. What do you think? And that's a really elegant way to bring in the concept that, oh, this thing exists. Oh, there's cool conversations happening there. Well, maybe I should check that out and be a part of it. And then at the end, when you say, and if you'd like to join the Canada Growth Network, where we're always having conversations, and often, inviting our guests, our members to be on this podcast, check it out at this link. It's very natural. You're kind of seeding the idea throughout. So I like adding things naturally as much as possible, naturally with a little bit of planning. We prune our gardens, we weed, we design. I think that's generally going to be the way to do it. It's usually going to be more effective than just dropping in an ad. Of course, it's a little more work as well. So you've got to kind of figure out if the juice is worth the squeeze. But usually it lands better with the audience.
Yeah, that is a great idea. It's almost like a very mom thing, especially, I'm just, I've seen moms going, okay, I got to get you to turn left here and, build up the story. 'Cause that's pretty awesome. Thank you.
I have
Wait,
now got to look as soon as we're off this call, I'm gonna see if Podcast Mom is available as a domain. That would be fun.
You'll have to beat me to it. I'd even change genders to own that domain.
I wanna be the
don't,
Podcast Mom.
don't do that, Wayne. The mustache will just, yeah, no.
Megan, I try to ask one weird and unfair question at least once in every interview. I
Good, your
want
listeners will
you
watch out for that.
Yes, that's my brand of mine. I want you to wear a magic wand use your magic wand for a second, not what is currently possible, but either technology, social changes, the death of TV, all the above, or something else. How is the person listening to a podcast going to let me know that he's listening in an organic way that feels more two-way than it currently does?
That's a really interesting question, and my personal feelings are different than my professional ones about it.
Good.
So, from a strictly how could podcasting be more effective at building engagement and building relationships, and growing businesses and developing things, when they can be beamed directly into heads and then the thoughts surrounding the podcast can be filtered back to the host, which I believe some evil tech moguls are currently working on. That would be really good data. And it's like with all of the AI stuff and with all of the automation stuff, what the internet knows about us is terrifying. So on the personal level, I love the way podcasts are. They're really, really opt in for listeners. A listener has to choose how they listen, when they listen, and what they do about it. And I think, getting that engagement is so critical. And it's really hard to get the engagement because there's friction. It means changing platforms because you can't go from listening to typing or sending a voicemail without doing something. And people hate doing things. So so it's difficult. I think honestly, the best way to do it is to create opportunities that people want to take part of because they're fun. I remember I was listening to a podcast, and this was years ago, and the host it was happier with Gretchen Rubin. That's what it was, and I can't remember the exact prompt, but it was something about taking a picture of this really fun thing and sharing it on the Instagram, and everybody having conversations and looking at each other's awesome pictures, and it was so fun to meet other listeners, to see what other people doing. It really created this community feeling that it was fun to participate in. It was worthwhile to do it because it was a compelling enough prompt. And I was like, I have a story like that. I want to share a story like that. And so I think integrating and to do it without completely ceding our minds and brains to the machine, hypothetically speaking, make it as appealing as possible. Because I think one of the beauties of podcasting is that it's not being shoved down anyone's throat. People have to choose, people get to choose when and how they listen to them. And I think that's a really great thing about the platform.
That's awesome. So if you're looking to collaborate with a guest, let's say
Mhm.
you've hit it off, everything's in sync. Although you can have a guest at repeat shows, right, which is okay. But let's say they're a subject matter expert that's kind of a broad range. So the example, the model would be, let's say Wayne and I interviewed a banker, and someone, he's talking or she's talking about whatever the case might be. Would it make sense then to have someone that talks about the financial markets later on and to tap in to give more context to the first person's conversation? So it's almost like having one main podcast and then a secondary come in. Is that the type of collaboration you're talking about? Or are you talking about collaboration as in doing interviews, joint interviews with people?
The answer to everything is sure, why not? There's a lot of different ways to look at potential collaborations from podcasts. On the kind of the top level, it would be I want to meet and get to know people that I can have really like collaborations with outside of the podcast. Maybe we send emails to each other's lists. Maybe we do a webinar together. Maybe we send referrals back and forth. That's kind of the first one. Now, the example that you mentioned of kind of creating interrelated content, that's really cool. It's going to be a logistical nightmare, but it's going to be really interesting. So in that, yeah, because if
As I said it, and I'm going, hang on, what am I doing here?
as you'll have seen, and as how any podcasters listening will know, it's hard enough to get a guest to listen to a single episode before they come on the show to hear what things are like, what the system is, how it goes. That's challenging enough. Getting them to listen to a specific conversation with another expert to then continue that conversation. I'm not saying people wouldn't do it. I'm saying it'll probably be a bit of a trick to arrange. And for that kind of thing where you have an ongoing conversation over multiple episodes, I'd get buy-in from the start and maybe have all of the participants involved in, say, a 3-episode series. Even if the 3 episodes are going to be released weeks or months apart, and try to do it all in a batch rather than recording an episode and saying, "What did you think about this conversation with that episode?" They didn't listen to it. 9 times out of 10, the expert, it's not going to have happened. A way to get around that as the host is to give them a brief synopsis. In the last conversation I had with Joe, he made this really great point that often teenagers and parents just fundamentally miscommunicate. And then you share a little bit. What do you think about that as a psychologist? And that gives them enough context to be able to frame a response. And I'd call it due diligence to, even if you know you're going to do that, send them the prep, send them the link in advance, give them the opportunity to really listen and really prepare. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But you want to make it look to the listening audience as if everything ran very smoothly. You don't want to look like you're trying to wrong foot the guest, would be a possible negative outcome of doing that.
I have realized that Bernie's main way to attract viewers of the 100,000 or more is to actually have guests have to listen to 3 podcasts. It's not individual listeners, it's guests that have to listen. That's what's driving our downloads. Actually, Megan, I have a great question for you, not only as a podcaster, but as a podcast producer. One thing that I find interesting about the industry is the podcast graveyard. Not in the successful
Mm.
ones, but the unsuccessful ones. The people who you almost know when you meet them, they're going to be really excited about 3, get bored, lazy, or frustrated and quit, and actually bring dishonor to the brand. How do you talk them out of that?
I talk them into doing a limited release season before committing to an ongoing show. That is always my recommendation for a brand new podcaster, because some people take to podcasting like a duck to water. And they're like, oh, this is the medium for me. I could do this forever. I would do this for fun. I do this for fun. And some people are just like, this is work. It beats the bookkeeping, but it's work. And in that case, it's nice to, you can put up, even if you don't like it, you can do 12 episodes. You can get through 12. And there's a really different kind of vibe or energy to, great, I did a season, it thoroughly explored one topic, and it has these different uses in my business, and it's going to be evergreen, and it's going to keep adding value, and I don't want to do another one. That's very different than, I started this show and I said it was going to be every Wednesday for the rest of time, and I gave up after 7 episodes because, boy, it sucks. I'd say if you're not 100% sure that you're going to like doing it for the long term, start with a short season. You can always keep going. You can always add more, but it's different to just kind of stop or to fade off or to let it die. So I say start with a contained project rather than an ongoing one.
I like that. You have someone that says, "I want to start my part." Well, yeah, rephrase that question again. That first coffee's not landing just all the way in yet. I'm ramping up slow, but I drove here to Carleton Place safe and sound. So if someone is starting up a podcast and you push it out and you have a platform and out it goes, and you know that once you release them into the wild, it's automatically getting 10,000 downloads in the first month, 2 months, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, year.
I mean, that's the
But
dream.
you absolutely, but the content though what you have is targeted towards, let's say, a specific audience.
Mm.
Let's say you're a home renovator and you just kind of want to have people understand what's in behind the scenes, understand the mechanisms. How do you get that? You can post it, you may not get the traction of the many, but how do you target that content then? See the audience who the home in this case a home renovator would want to seek out and just go, hi, here's the tidbits. Not only to say why I am better or different or what's unique, but these are things you should watch out for, even if you don't use me.
What is the
How do you
que-
how, how do you market it?
how do you
How do
market a
you
podcast?
well
So,
no, it's a bit more than just how to market a podcast. Like marketing the podcast itself is, hi, come listen to the show. Here's the core messaging. But if I am a home renovator, or I am a car salesperson, or I am a dentist, right? There are going to be kernels of truth that you want your audience to pick up on. They might not listen for the 30 or 60 minutes, depending on the length of the podcast. How do you get them to cue in to the podcast that it provides what you're saying? It's part of your marketing messaging. How do you leverage that? How do you set that up?
I'm going to sound like a broken record when I say it. It starts with the planning. So when you've got a hyper specific niche like that, and you hopefully as a business owner, you know them really well. Say the home renovator example. If I were consulting on that kind of a project, the first thing I'd want to talk about are, what are kind of the trigger points or the life events or the things that go on that make someone go, okay, it's time to do a renovation, or I need to renovate. Is it if something breaks? Is it if they buy a new house? Is it if they have a kid? Is it if the kids move out? And I would record episodes specifically about those times in life, at those particular moments. And that's going to kind of hopefully get someone aware of the podcast for the first time. Within the episode, it's going to mention, here's some things you can worry about. Also listen to this episode. Also listen to that episode. These are all also very important things to know. So you get them in with that trigger point where they be like, oh, actually, I need information about renovations. And so that's kind of setting up the infrastructure, what you can direct someone to that's hopefully going to draw them in. On the marketing end of it, go back to those life events or those trigger points, those flash points when someone might change their behavior or take an action or start seeking out information. And think about all of the places they're going to go to for innovation, for information, and make it so maybe they might talk to their real estate agent for a recommendation about different things. Okay, then I'm going to talk to every real estate agent I know and say, hey, I've got a great episode about things that people should consider before doing a renovation. It might be really useful for your clients. Here's the link. You can make it available. Give them the copy. Make it really, really easy. The same thing with banks, with local hardware stores, or your designers, everyone who might potentially have access to people who are going to be approached when that issue comes up for the client/listener, and make it easy for them to share and make it a value add for them to be able to provide. That's going to hopefully bring somebody into your orbit a little bit. And so that's one way I'd market it, is figure out what are going to be the times or the scenarios when people are going to be most interested in this content, and what are they going to do once they have that realization, and how can I insert myself and my podcast into that process?
Megan, I'd love to hear about a success story where somebody did some lifting and they connected in a way they didn't suspect, and they met somebody they would never have met, and they got married, they added a new division, whatever. I don't know. Tell me about an aha moment that keeps you going.
I'd say this is this one didn't result in a marriage, but it was this amazing example of someone just kind of reaching for the stars and getting to meet one. So I was working on a show once, and the concept was people who were making a living by creating content, by creating like different art, by writing, by music, all those things. And he was just on Instagram one day, and he's like, you know what? I really like the band Whitesnake. Why don't I reach out to the drummer? So I sent him an Instagram DM. And the drummer of Whitesnake, this famous band, was just like, yeah, sure, man. I'd love to be on your podcast. And so they had this great conversation, and it was on the show, and it was a really popular episode. And, it didn't go beyond that because they had wildly different industries of work that they were doing. But it was just this thing he never expected would actually happen. But he took the shot, and people love being on podcasts. And even on the interview, asked the musician, why did you say yes? I'm a nobody. And he's like, never turn down a promotional opportunity, man. You always got to do it. So I thought that was just a really cool example. It never hurts to ask. You might hear no, but it's not insulting. It's not rude. Just, you can ask.
You benefit from selling podcasts, people.
I do.
Ironically enough, there are people who come to you that are mildly delusional and you don't lie to them. But how do you help them choose reality, even though it may even seem to cost you a sale, when what they think they're the next Rogan? Tell me how you stay optimistic and positive and not sales minded, but product aware when they're unrealistic.
Yeah, I have found more often than not, people are refreshed by honesty. Podcasting and selling online, especially on the internet. Like it's a division of internet marketing. It's full of awful people. There's there's ungreat people in the industry. We all know that. And so most of the time I've found people really appreciate getting kind of no, this is the reality. This is what you can expect. If you want this, it's going to cost this, or if you do this, want this, you're going to have to do that. And sometimes people are like, nope, you're wrong. I'm going to go with someone who can give me the moon. Sometimes I never hear back. Sometimes I do. And they're like, actually, maybe we could have a discussion about the reality you were talking about again. And I mean, I'm not happy when that happens. I don't like people to have to go through that kind of experience. I don't like seeing anyone getting taken for a ride, but it does happen. And I think over time, it's so much better to just be honest about expectations. I don't like delivering what we can't promise. I don't like saying this is possible when I don't think it is. And I'd rather err on the side of caution and then surprise someone with unexpected results than promise unexpected results and let them know the reality actually isn't as good. So I think it's generally my experience of my business partner calls me Megan, Destroyer of Dreams.
You're not
That's how a
sitting
lot
there
of
with a shield.
conversations begin,
You're not sitting there with a shield and a hammer in hand, are you?
and not at work.
What are the typical myths, like top three myths that small medium businesses have about podcasting? I think we've touched on a couple of them.
Mhm.
Your skill set for conversational anything is, or you're not putting energy. I've interviewed one person for a podcast, And I'm asking him during the interview, "You okay? Like, did you get sleep last night?" And only to have him say, I have really a poker face." And I'm like, "Okay, so in the podcast, if you have that, no one's going to listen. Just give me a heads up. What are the typical myths that you come across?" I mean, that's expression is perfect, but what are the other things that
Mhm.
people get kind of confused about?
I think a lot of it, a lot of the myths kind of they come down to one key misunderstanding, and that is that a podcast has an objective and correct form that it needs to be in or that it needs to follow. And for businesses, that's simply not true. I mean, outside of the fact that it's available via RSS is like maybe the most baseline technical definition that we can get for a podcast. But outside of that, and that's even wiggly these days with YouTube and video podcasting and all of that stuff. A podcast is a tool that you can design to do whatever you need for your business. As long as it can be done by having conversations and create like editing the content and making it available, you can do it. You can do it to promote your community. You can do it to, meet new clients. You can do it to grow a professional network. You can do it to develop content that you're going to sell and present in other ways. You can do whatever you want. You just have to kind of sit down and decide, what is it that I want? What tells me that's working? And what's all of the other stuff that people are going to tell me is important that doesn't actually matter to me and my business goals? And I'm looking at you, downloads, when I say that, because while there are, business goals that depend on downloads and audience growth and reach, a lot don't, because for a lot of people, it's going to be a lot more valuable to fill up their content engine, like their social media machine, really efficiently than it is to get a whole bunch of downloads. There's tons of examples like that. But I think kind of the ultimate misunderstanding is that a podcast has to look and behave a certain way just because it's called a podcast. But it doesn't have to be just an interview that happens every week that's 44 minutes long and is a conversation between two people. It can be whatever you want it to be. As long as it's working for your business, it's right.
Megan, I think a lot of people who trip into podcasting come from listening to radio, which was a
Mhm.
totally different market from a totally different time. But one thing that I do love your opinion on is at the end of the day, it's entertainment. And
Mhm.
there's certainly depth of matter, like expert, but I wonder your take on, I know everything there is to know about Lionel trains, and you have to tell them that is absolutely wonderful, and the 8 people that care will listen to you, but you're deadly, deadly dull. Do you ever have those conversations?
I mean, I turn that around on, do you enjoy making the podcast about the Lionel trains? Do the people who are listening enjoy listening to what other people call your dull, expositions on Lionel trains? And if the answer to both of those questions is yes, then I'd say you are successfully podcasting.
Okay.
Like, I think you only need broad appeal if broad appeal is going to help your business in specific and measurable ways. You're allowed to podcast just because it's fun. You're allowed to podcast and have nobody ever listen to it if you enjoy it and you're like, if it adds value to your life, you can just do it. And if like it's like any kind of other art or craft. There's for many people as much value in the journey as in the destination or in the processes in the outcomes. Now, that's often going to be different for a business owner because this is a marketing project. It's a business development tool. It does need to have an outcome that we can measure and that is going to, be more than the effort it costs to produce it. At some point, that has to happen. That's different for a hobby or passion project. So I'd say there is a line there, but if somebody just wants to like have their podcast, The Weekly Pickle, and discuss the different pickles they're enjoying that week, cool, go to town. Have a great time.
All the cucumber growers kick in and going, "Yes, yes, we'll use." And I think that also, like the Lionel train, and I get where Wayne, if you're talking about a fashion program, but oddly enough, people that set up the trains in their home, that's their hobby, right? And but they're not going to be on a podcast, but want to know information about, or the people that sell the product or sell the. And I remember looking at it. A buddy of mine was actually saying about the train set thing, right? And I'm looking, how much is that? Left it. It's just all together plus space, right? I think there's always going to be value. If you have a client who's typical Lionel train guy, or it could be Lionel Richie, the song. If you have someone that's going, listen, I've got this, I want to monetize it. Do you help them track down a brand that would, in the case of the Lionel trains, it'd be the manufacturer of said trains, right? Or or groups, associations, you help them kind of sort out. They're not, they don't know the audience yet, but they have the passion, but there's some sort of cross connection. They just haven't made that. Is that something you do?
No. The work that I tend to do typically is I work with podcasts that for established or existing businesses who already have something that they sell that we then fit a podcast into. But the advice I would give to someone in that situation, because it's you can totally start a podcast as a business and try to build a business around the podcast. It's going to be challenging, but especially in a really niche community like the example we're talking about with the model trains, there's conferences, there's conventions, there's manufacturers, there's people who do the paints for the models, there's people who make the stands and the engines and the circuits for them. There are a lot of vendors and providers in that space who could conceivably pay for an audience. So I think there is a case, especially in like a niche hobby like that. I bet if we went to look right now, we would find no less than a dozen. And that's a very conservative estimate, model train podcasts. I am positive there are more than that. But so I think it's really to make a podcast, a hobby podcast, to monetize it, to make it financially viable, you need the downloads, you need the audience. So you're going to spend a lot of time marketing the podcast. And you're going to have to get up to pretty high numbers to be able to command, a real money and real income. It's not that it can't happen, but it's not a very good business plan.
So it'll be easier then to be, if even if you have a podcast, would it be easier to get on other people's podcasts to get that traction that brings them back to your podcast?
One of the best ways.
See, Wade, we got to go on more road shows.
I'm happy. Hey, I'm a new author. I'm going to hit up Megan after the interview. Megan, one thing that interests me is there's the technical fact that anyone with a new iPhone could actually do a podcast if they tripped over it long enough. I'm guessing that you are best packaged as training wheels. Is that a fair language?
In that the kind of the services that we provide or that what we do is sort of like the hand holding and helping people get going, or
Yes.
I think that's fair. I mean, I love newbies, and as you say, you don't need any previous experience to podcast. And yeah, I think it kind of comes down to when it's a business expense. I think when it's a business project, I think it's reasonable to invest in support to do it as well as possible out of the gate. If you're a very new business and say you don't have a budget for that kind of thing, or if you're just starting out and you want to kind of test in your off time, not associated with business, yeah, grab the iPhone, record some episodes, learn how to do editing, learn how to do all that stuff on your own. It'll give you a much better idea of what that kind of service might be worth to you down the road, and it'll give you a good idea of parts that you like about it, parts that you don't like about it. So, I mean, I'm always delighted to take someone who's never so much as thought about podcasting, and I can get them on Spotify in 6 weeks, and it'll be a great time. We'll have fun doing it. But you don't need professional support to get started. You can just experiment. There's lots of information. There's lots of resources. You can get my book if you really want to. But, I'd say it comes to one of my clients often asks about when we're talking about the strategy of our show, is the juice worth the squeeze for this change or for this idea or for this effort? And so if the juice is going to be worth the squeeze for your business, if it's going to generate you, tens of thousands of dollars a year, yeah, you should probably get professionals in to take on a lot of the work and to help you with the strategy and to do the editing so that you can focus your time on serving those clients or meeting those clients and being the host of the show. If you're not at a point in your business where you can bring on help, but a podcast would be useful and you've got good reason to believe it can help you, yeah, start scrappy. A lot of shows do. It's getting more difficult to start scrappy because there are so many shows, but I'd say it's still worth doing to at least prove the concept. And you can always do like live streams or other kinds of content to sort of test things out and get a lot of the benefits without investing whole hog in yourself. And to the last thing we were talking about, be a guest on other people's shows. You'll get great content and they pay for the production. It's awesome.
So great segue. Tell us about the book, Megan.
So I've got my copy right here. This is Podcasting for Business, how to create a show that makes a bottom line difference for your company. And in this book, I outline our model. It's the Business Podcast Blueprints, where you take your overarching podcast goal, figure out what that is, use that as a decision-making filter for everything else. And in the book, we've got 15 different business outcomes that you can optimize a podcast for. So we've got things like sales cycle length, sales qualified leads, audience growth, affiliate sales. There's tons of stuff in there. It's very good. I set out to try and write a textbook for profitable podcasting, and I like to think I succeeded.
That's great.
And it's
You know-
available where?
It is available at podcastingforbusiness.com. You'll be able to find it there, and depending on when this airs, you may be able to find it for free. This is news. I haven't announced this yet, but the book is coming off of Amazon, and it is going to be made freely available to people who are interested in podcasting for business.
Excellent. Excellent. So another strategy, would it be, is the customer testimonial is always the of the sweetness, right? It's the kind of the proof in pudding. You see people using Google reviews as an option, when you're kind of look, I see a product that's too good to be true and it's on Facebook, and then I go for the reviews, and then I go to a third party, going, how true is this? And then you hear, thumbs up or thumbs down. Would you recommend then, if let's say, whether it's the guy that installs or does renovations to the automotive to the dentist, would it make sense for them to have a short mini series of interviews, of podcasts of clients doing the testimonials?
Not if it's just testimonials as full episodes. I think that would be excruciatingly boring for the vast majority of listeners. Talking to them about maybe say like let's go with let's have the dentist example. Talking to past clients about the dental health and what happened in the story and what led up to it. Those kind of stories people would love. If you've got the client that's willing to share that kind of personal, vulnerable information, there's always going to be a balance to strike there. People like stories, kind of standalone glowing reviews, not so interesting. But what
Yeah.
happened? How did it feel? What happened? What was difficult? What was challenging? When did you decide to take the leap? Those can be a lot more interesting. Maybe not as every single episode. In some industries, you could probably do every single episode. Finance podcast, I tell you, people will listen to every finance podcast that's produced. But I think the idea is to get the balance there a little bit. Maybe have instead of having a whole testimonial episode, maybe you devote a minute at the end of every episode to great customer feedback, and you can just insert that and have like a little voice line where people can call in and leave a testimonial or clip it from testimonials you're getting elsewhere. But I think a podcast episode would need more meat than is just included in a testimonial. So I think either make it a part of a longer episode or make it about the story.
Megan, you can't use names, obviously, but our listeners love train wreck stories. Do you have a train wreck story?
Wayne likes train wreck stories,
Okay,
actually.
Wayne likes train wreck stories.
Gosh, I mean, there's train wreck stories all the time. Earlier in the history of our company, this was probably back around 2019, and we were working on a show, and it was a fairly high profile show. It was kind of one that, looking back, we were too junior of a company and too inexperienced to really have taken on. We probably shouldn't have tried to take it on at our level of experience. Didn't know that at the time. We thought, oh yeah, we could do this. But we had a team member on board who was also kind of new, and we're like, okay, this is going to be great. We're going to get everything going. And just collectively as a team, we made so many mistakes. Things went out at the wrong date. Things went out with typos, and it was just absolutely humiliating. And eventually the client, who had been very gracious throughout the issues and the issues, she's like, so I think I'm done. And I said, oh yeah, I think that's fair. And she's like, I'm not going to work out the notice period. And I said, that's completely fair too. That's my personal train wreck, was just really having taken on a project that was requiring a higher level of experience than we had at the time. It would be a different story today. I think we'd be able to do a much better job. But back then, that was my train wreck. I was never so
I remember
embarrassed in my life.
I remember sending out an email to somebody, and usually it's a reminder to hi, supply content for the podcast that's coming up. And the word I use is nudge. And you know that if you drop the letter G quite by accident, it sends a different message. And so the gent I sent it to, I said, I really apologize. He said, it's okay. It provided me a good chuckle for the day because I hadn't had one, and that was it. And so now every time I'm typing, I always remember the G. Otherwise, it's awkward. People want to get a hold of you. How do they make that happen?
Easiest way to get a hold of me is by email, and you can email me through any contact form on onestonecreative.net. They all come to my inbox. So that's going to be the easiest way to do it. It's called the Business Podcast Spotlight. I'm pleased to say, Brittany and Wayne, you've both been excellent guests on the show. And what we do on the Spotlight is we look at the different ways that business owners are leveraging podcasts within their business, because I've got lots of ideas, but I don't have the only ideas. And so it's really fun to explore what people are doing, how they're doing it, how they're marketing shows, how they're leveraging relationships. And so every show is basically a case study where we talk about that kind of thing. And then it ends with sort of a take-it-home lesson if you want to apply some of what we talked about to yourself. So it's a really fun show, and I'd love for you to take it out. You'll also find it on One Stone Creative.
Perfect. So I want to say thank you to Megan Dougherty, my co-host Wayne Pratt, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. So you think you have the ability to have the gift for gab, and you want to monetize it and have a good conversation, because the podcast is no more than just a conversation. Whether you're doing the talking or you're doing it with a guest or a co-host, Megan's the lady to run into and have a good chat with. She'll help bring this powerful tool forward for you to build relationships and driving growth.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter U.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.